The painting, the underpainting is done, meaning the topographical geography of the thing is done. There's basically impasto paint where there needs to be impasto paint, and it's flat where it needs to be flat. And even though, as a side effect of that process, there's a lot of color, as you see it right here, it's got a lot of essentially guide color that I used just offhand while doing the underpainting. It is pretty much still just a bare underpainting. It's light where it needs to be light. It's dark where it needs to be dark. But essentially, any color that's already there at this point is incidental. And at this stage, pretty much all the color is going to go on, and it seems anticlimactic, I guess, or a kind of a cheat, because basically there were a couple stages to this coloring process, and this video here is only the first of those. Because the second would be more of the same, and frankly I just got sick of setting up the camera. So, and like I discussed in a previous video, these are the nice paints. These are the luxurious colors, the good colors, the exact color, and what's nice is that you don't use very much. I mean, you can see on the palette there, it's it's sort of one little dab of each color, and I think a couple of these coloring, toning steps, and then probably a couple of other little adjustments where I just grabbed a tube of paint and took a little dab out of the tube, sort of tweak or fix little things. But it's really rewarding too, because at this point, every little thing you do just makes it look so much nicer. A lot of times you look at it before one of these stages and you think, well, it looks pretty good. And I have people say that to me and wonder why why don't I just leave it like that? And that happens as an inner dialogue too. But one thing I've noticed is that it never hurts to do more. I don't think it's ever really happened that I've looked at a painting and thought, I'm going to put a little bit more paint on there, and had it ruin anything. The worst possible scenario that way is that you have to then put another something on to make it look how you want to. But in my experience, the more passes you make at a painting, the better it looks. And in fact, how I know when I'm done is that I'm not really doing anything in subsequent passes. If I find myself just tinkering with it and not really adding anything to it, I know I've plateaued. I've reached that point where there's, that's how I know it's done. But anymore, that doesn't even happen. I pretty much just do a couple of coloring passes, and then I'll stare at it for a couple days, wait for the paints to adjust down, and make little fixes to things that stand out. And usually it's just a matter of grabbing a sort of a transparent brown or transparent blue, and basically knocking down something that's too bright, or in some cases taking something may have gotten knocked down too far, and basically putting a little bit more white on it and then coloring it again. And I don't know if I mentioned this in one of the earlier videos of this painting, but one thing I've recently become aware of is the fact that acrylic paints cure up or develop. And I kind of noticed this early on, but I thought maybe I was just imagining it. And even when I figured out that it does happen, I wasn't really sure why, but it finally did occur to me, and most graphically, because I had a little cup that I had plain acrylic medium in that I was using for something anyway. There was about a quarter of an inch of it in the bottom of a cup, and it was, put a lid on it, and left it sitting for a few months, and it was just sitting there on my desk, and I didn't really. So anyway, I finally went to pitch it, and it occurred to me that that quarter inch of medium in the bottom of the cup still wasn't clear. It still looked white. It was, set up. It was hard. It wasn't liquid at all. And yeah, it was still totally opaque. It looked not bright white, but it looked like white paint. And my point being that what that tells me is that the acrylic part of acrylic paints, the binder and the medium, is white. It's opaque until it totally cures up, and then it becomes clear. So if you have a very thin layer of acrylic paint, that happens relatively quickly. But as you're doing a painting, and especially one like this where it's built up with a lot of thickness of paint, but I've noticed it even in relatively thin wash paintings, that when you finish the painting and you think it's done, and it feels dry and it's not cool anymore, it over the span of a few weeks, and that's for a typical painting. I imagine for a thick painting like this it'd be even longer. The colors come in as that slightly opaque acrylic binder becomes fully transparent, fully clear, and the real nature of the colors comes through. So even though it's dry and you can move it and everything, it really, you got to wait a few weeks before these things reach their full potential or really look like they're really going to look. And so one thing I've kind of done in response to that is I don't really, there's no urgency to call a painting done. I set it aside, and every once in a while I'll look at it and see how it's doing. I actually hang them up in my bedroom, so I kind of stare at them when I'm lying in bed, nothing to do. And most times nothing really happens other than it does become a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more richly colored, and so on. But there's been occasion where after that process happens, you think, oh, well, that thing that I didn't even notice before now is something that needs addressing. So, and I go back and make some more tweaks. So who knows? This painting in question here isn't old enough for me to know that. So we'll see. I guess to go back to something else. Well, actually, let me address this. I've probably got 15 colors there, and basically, what's going on is they are transparent colors with a medium. They're essentially very transparent, and what I'm doing is putting on sort of nudges of color in various directions. And just to address sort of a nuts and bolts thing, usually what I'll do is work a color. I'll go around I'll put down the colors just so they're there, and so I can kind of not have to stop and think about that. What colors I need to get out. So I'll just put a bunch down. And keep them wet. But then, just by nature of not having to stop and clean the brush and have unnecessary steps, basically what I'll do is I'll work a color. So I'll take in this case it's sort of a, I don't know what that is. It's hard to tell after the fact. It's a, I don't know. It's a raw umber, I think. But so one by one around the colors, grab the color and then figure out where it needs to go on the painting, rather than focus on an area of the painting and what color needs to go there. So basically, you can see that especially here. I've grabbed the raw umber and I basically just scan over the painting and saying to myself, where does it need this color? And raw umber for me is something that just sort of nudges something down a tone. So basically, what I'm doing right now is looking for parts of the painting that are too bright, too white, or whatever, and putting a little dab of this fairly transparent, neutral-ish dark, and doing that, just scanning, and there's no real plan to it. There's no logic to it. Although watching the video after the fact here, it looks like I'm kind of going circular and scanning, but really it's just I look over and whatever catches my attention. And that, especially with something like raw umber, that's, you want to look for something that looks like it needs to be knocked down. But then you go on to a pink maybe, and you're just looking for, okay, where does this pink go? A little highlight here, a little dab there, a little wash here, and then so on and so on. And I like that, because it's intuitive and it's the way I think and the way I work. But it also leads to, you're not so fixated on anything. You can kind of go, I'll just put a dab here, and if it turns out not to be what really needed to be there, well, no problem really, because you're probably going to go over it with some other color or two or three fairly quickly here. So it enforces a sort of freedom or relaxation that lets you, not worry, and it helps me kind of keep going, and keeps a flow and emotion to things, which leads to I think a more organic effect. But it also, and this wasn't any intention, but I like the way they look after the fact, because you do see all these little things are built up of multiple colors that maybe shouldn't really be there. So instead of just having brown, you can see all the little layers and all the little different areas of color that built up that brown. Little gaps, little transparencies, and so instead of just having a piece of red cloth, you've got something that's built up of oranges and reds and yellows and golds and pinks and maybe a little bit of blue here and there, and that to me looks, well, in a representational sense, it mimics real life, because you get variability and not block surface textures. But also in terms of the painting object itself, it gives it a more jewel-like, a more varied or interesting surface. So in every way, it's a good way to work. And I wish I could say that was all intentional, but really it's just a side effect of. Really, it originally comes from me just being sort of miserly and not wanting to wash my brush out too often. I don't like the idea of, okay, I'm going to put this little color here, and then I'm going to rinse everything out and throw away all that paint and then grab the other color that needs to go here and so on. I just can't work that way. It bothers me. Another thing that, it was of interest, I guess, at this point, was that I'd been reading a lot, and I've mentioned this before, about vision and optics, and this painting especially. I think I'm going to do another video just sort of scanning around this thing, because from this view you can't really, you can see the effect somewhat of the texture that goes into this, but from an off angle or from a moving angle, you really get more of an idea of what's going on. And there's some fairly drastic surface textures in certain places, and in other places it's very flat. For instance, right where I'm, the paper that's hanging behind the model, part of the effect of making it look like paper is that it is a very flat, matte surface. And in fact, one of the things I found most interesting is I didn't map this out intentionally, but if you look at a sort of an oblique angle at the model, her hair is very textured, and most of her skin is very textured, and her clothing is very textured. But the plane of her face is very flat and very smooth. So not only is it sort of a pure white, but that smoothness makes it look like smooth, delicate skin. Subconsciously, I guess. And in this thing, for instance, the various cloth has a frequency of texture. It's a high frequency texture or low frequency texture. So that, for example, in her dress, you can see an implication of the weave of the cloth, but also the folds of the cloth, with a lower frequency texture. And most of the cloth has, I'm not drawing out weave and cloth, not there's no loom effect or whatever. But there's little brush strokes which give you a visual effect of a cloth texture, even though it's really just a random pattern. So yeah, the cloth is basically it's almost speckled with little brush strokes, and then it also has a broader brush strokes that are, imply the movement and the folds and the creases in the fabric. The background, actually, the background's an interesting side note, which is, even though it's flat black, it is actually very textured, and it's in a way that I noticed in Van Gogh paintings. I went through a period of sort of reproducing all of his nighttime paintings. Just, I don't know, I like astronomy, and it just seemed like something I was interested in. But anyway, one of the things I noticed is that he used a pattern in his night skies. It wasn't just flat. He used sort of a crisscrossing pattern with I don't know, maybe a 3/4 inch brush. And so, and it's somewhat flowing, but really, you're kind of going down, across, down, up, cross, down, and you're basically cross-hatching with fairly thick gobs of paint. And in his case, he used, I think, cobalt blue and black of some sort. And what that does for you is it gives you a black, but that doesn't have a surface appearance. So it actually seems to be farther away than the level of the canvas, because you don't get a plane that reflects light back to you at all. You don't get that surface reflection off of the paint itself. So it actually it has the effect of making it recede even farther by tricking your eye. But the other nice thing, about that, the way he used it, was that those slight, the dark blue and a black, or several different versions. When you do those crisscrossings, you get the effect of sparkling. So it looks, it tells your eye there's something sparkling there, or stars up in the sky. But in this case, it's just black. I just used probably carbon black, some sort. But it is the brush strokes. There's a fair amount of texture in it. I put it on thick with brush strokes in that manner, crisscrossing. So when you see it in person, actually, this is interesting too. The mirror in this, on the far left there, is flat black, but the rest of the blacks in the painting, to both sides of the model basically, are this textured black. And so the mirror has the effect of being a black, but it looks like it's a reflection. Whereas the rest of it seems like it's just distant. You don't see a surface there. Anyway, this painting is all about that stuff. It's really worth seeing in person, because most of what's going on, well, not most of it, but a large chunk of what's going on is these sort of optical effects that really only work when you see it in person. It's not that they do actually have an effect on what you can see here, or really in a better, reproduction of it. But you don't see everything when you see a reproduction. So, it's I'm pretty happy about that, because originally a big part of the reason I do painting originally derives from the fact that I was doing photography, and we went through a sort of a paradigm change in the world where photography lost its meaning in terms of an expressive art. Photography is something that everybody takes for granted, and so no one looks at it. You can't get someone to look intentionally at a photograph, and so through various venues, I've been trying for the past few years to produce things that you do have to see in person. You can't say, "Oh, just send me a picture on my phone, and then I'll know what it is." You don't. That's something for another video. In terms of, there's actually ways to produce photographic output that does that forces the viewer to look at it in person. But the same with painting. Painting is one way to do it. And I think most people know that to see a painting in person isn't the same as to see a photograph of it, but there's varying degrees of that. You can paint in such a way that it might as well be a photograph, and there's color space issues and so on and so on. But this painting and the techniques of texture and manipulation of texture versus color versus transparency. This definitely is something that looks, certainly much different in person, and I think it looks a lot better. I think it looks pretty good on the screen too, but it's a real treat to look at in person. It has those qualities of fine fabric or jewelry or furniture, things like that. So it's just nice to look at. It really is, and hopefully, ultimately, that is the goal. I mean, I know a lot of people. Actually, that's something that's worth addressing. I know a lot of people who they ask me, oh, what's the meaning of this, or why do you do this? And I seem to get perplexed looks when I explain that I'm just trying to make something that looks good. I actually think that's a very noble and maybe one of the most pure or best motivations or meaning behind a painting is to just to produce something that's beautiful. I don't, by and large, try to express myself in paintings. I don't. I don't think it's a very good medium for expressing yourself. I mean, I'm not opposed to it, and I think it's great when people do, but I don't think it's necessary, and it's not really something that it's certainly not a primary consideration for me. Which is not to say I try and keep my emotions or my feelings out of it, but the purpose of a painting isn't to get something out or to express something that I wanted to say. I just I just don't think it's a good medium for that. It doesn't contain. I mean, it doesn't contain enough breadth of communicative vocabulary, I guess. You can't. And as human beings, we have other ways to communicate other things. I don't think it makes sense to say I'm going to encapsulate everything in this one channel of my communication. So to me, a painting as an object is about these things. How does it look? How does it behave? How does it interact with you in terms of how it looks? Not so important, but also not something that you ignore or that I ignore. I mean, it is something that I pay attention to. Is how does this thing feel? What's its weight? What's its depth? What's its heft? What's its surface texture? How does it smell? All these things are important. It is an object that has these properties. So when someone interacts with it in person, every time I sell a painting, I always like to wax the insides of the stretchers with beeswax, so that it just has that it has that little something. It's a thing that it and to put an opposing instance in there. It bothers me when I'll go see a painting and it smells like mothballs, or it smells like solvents, or it smells like plastic, or whatever the case is. They do smell like something, and you can say, oh well, that's silly to think about it, but if you really, it's not like you're not making it by ignoring the issue that you're gonna make it not smell bad. By ignoring the issue, you're saying I want my painting, or I don't care what it smells like. It isn't that if you don't care about it, it won't smell like anything. It will. It'll smell like something that somebody doesn't want in their living room. Maybe. I mean, maybe you get lucky and it doesn't, or it smells good. Oil paintings are a big problem this way. I mean, I've bought a few oil paintings in my life. I don't work with oils for various reasons, but when I bought them, I buy them and I have to put them out in the garage for 6 months because they're off gassing that turpentine or I don't know what it is, but they bother me. I mean, it's a very offensive thing. So at any rate, I try and pay attention to that, and I pick paints based on what they smell like, and like I said, I'll try and mask up stuff. I cut my own stretchers actually out of lumber because I like the way that the pine, the resinous pine, I do it up. They're construction lumber, relatively green, and when you cut it, you get that sort of resinous smell, and it's actually kind of nice because you get boards from different forests and areas, and they have different, balsam or spruce or, but a lot of nice different aromas, and that's something to pay attention to. Again, all this is expressing just there, and why I'm talking about this now is this is the stage of the painting where that's what's going on with the color. It's not just putting a color here. It's okay, I've got this underlayer, this foundation, and now I'm putting on a few layers of color that are going to interact. They are transparent, but they have a depth that's almost minuscule, but it's not nothing. So you get, this is the point where you're putting on color where light is actually going to shine through it both ways. You can sometimes get iridescence because of the surface gaps between layers of color, but you're certainly going to be able to see through them. And so you're getting, instead of just say red, you're going to have an area where if someone looks at it, they're going to see not just red, but it's yellow, orange, blue, black, red, and so on. So it's all we're thinking about, and this is the point of the painting where all that nuance happens.